The Israeli news cycle is currently led by two main issues: the IDF's anti-terror operation in Jenin that ended yesterday night, and the judicial reform, with the Knesset committees proceeding to vote on different articles of relevant bills. At the same time, Israelis are looking beyond the borders, including at a potential chill of relations between Washington and Jerusalem, and developments over an Iranian nuclear agreement. To discuss all of these interesting and complex topics, we at the Jerusalem Press Club are happy to host Professor Yossi Shain, former member of the Knesset for the Israel Beiteinu Party, and emeritus professor of Georgetown University and of the Political Science Department at the Tel Aviv University and its former head, and former president of the Western Galilee College. Today, Professor Shain is a liaison of Brandeis University in Israel. Our conversation today is going to cover a different range of topics, from Israel's geopolitical situation, including vis-a-vis the United States, the current security situation, the political arena, and more. Professor Shain, thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you for having me.
I wanted originally to start with politics, but I think we cannot ignore the security situation right now, especially as you have been a member of the Foreign Affairs and Security Committee. This week, we saw a major operation launched in Jenin. Is this part of a wider plan you know of to uproot terror? And how would you grade the army and the government's actions against the Palestinian terror so far?
Look, we have an ongoing issue which relates to terrorism from the West Bank coming into Israeli cities, and of course in what we know as Judea and Samaria, in Hebrew, in the West Bank. We have also a very delicate moment in the life of the Palestinians because of their lack of, I would say, any vision of their future, and above and beyond, because of the decline of the central authority of the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. The central authority of the Palestinians, of Abu Mazen, is becoming a very difficult situation. It is the reason for it is both internally and vis-a-vis the state of Israel. Internally, Abu Mazen has been at the helm for generations. He has been there, but have not been able to appoint or generate procedures of succession. His stature has been challenged by Palestinians themselves, including, of course, the forces of Hamas, who are led by the people in Gaza and the Iranian sponsorship, and the Islamic Jihad. The decline of the Palestinian Authority also resonates because of the very shaky relations vis-a-vis the state of Israel and the government in Israel. Government in Israel itself is constantly undermining the Palestinian Authority because they don't consider the Palestinian Authority a partner into the future the way the Palestinians would have liked to have it. And the Palestinians, in all respects, have lost kind of a gravity in terms of political leadership. All of this is nourishing an atmosphere of gangs, an atmosphere of terrorism that is led by splinter groups, both in Gaza and in the West Bank. And the motivation for action has increased because of also the conditions in the Middle East and the incitement of the Iranians, Hezbollah in the north, and Hamas in Gaza. In addition, of course, to the difficulties and the crisis, immense crisis, that Israel is now facing domestically in terms of the rivalry in Israel over judicial reform, the weakening of the Israeli society as a result of that, and the possibilities perhaps the terrorists are seeing as what they consider to be the resolve of the Israelis to fight, which of course is a miscalculation, but nevertheless, that is sort of the motivations. All of these have led to an outburst of terrorist activities, which is not just from the beginning of this government, but we're also facing the former government, albeit the former government has taken care of many of it early on by closing the what we call the fence along the line of Jenin in the northern part of the West Bank.
The West Bank. Yeah.
So what we are seeing here is a confluence of lots of things which have led the Israeli military echelon, intelligence echelon, the political echelon to decide that this is the time to go into operation, as they did before, several times before, to uproot the base which has been created, the terrorist base which has been created in Jenin as a threatening, directly threatening Israel, of course, in addition to the arming of these groups with all kind of new, I would say, innovations and the testing of Israel resolve by creating even some new rockets which were threatening Israeli cities. The attacks on Israeli citizens all over the Judea and Samaria and in Israel has required the military and the Shin Bet, the intelligence forces, to act now before this will get out of hand. And that is the reason for this operation.
So you think the action Israel took is justified? Is it the thing we should have done? And another question I had in mind when you spoke about the Palestinian Authority is they threatened to end the security cooperation with Israel, and not for the first time. Is this something that should worry us?
Look, the Palestinians and Abu Mazen have threatened before, and in fact, de facto, several times have, in fact, to his chagrin, I would say, has lowered the collaboration with Israelis and and harming his own population. Keep in mind that even as we speak, and the operation in Jenin was going on, tens of thousands of Palestinians from the Jenin area have been coming into Israel for labor, for work on a day-to-day basis. So this is kind of like seen to some people as almost an oxymoron. On the one hand, we fight. On the other hand, they come and work among the Israelis, and the economy of the Palestinians is dependent on Israeli markets. So the most of the Jenin population would love to have just normality as they had before, and the city flourishing, enjoying markets of Arab Israelis coming to Jenin. But now it has been hijacked by terrorists, by splinter groups who have taken over Jenin, and especially the refugee camps in Jenin, along the lines of Jenin, and undermining the life and I would say movement of Palestinians in the region. So it is very complex to explain it to people sometimes abroad how this is working, because the nexus is so close. But this is a big issue that we are facing, and we have faced it before.
So you can estimate that this is not the last time that the IDF will need to go into Jenin?
I don't think that this is the last time for anything. I think this is an ongoing issue. We have been facing this issue, in fact, in variety of, in many variations over now. This is almost 6 decades now, 5.5 decades, and this will continue in different shapes and form. The very fact that the Palestinians lacking central authority and lacking monopoly over the means of violence in their midst, and encouraging splinter groups and do not try to develop a certain culture of collaboration, compounded by the fact that we have an Israeli right-wing government that does not showing any signs of collaboration with Abu Mazen or appreciation for his government, creating chaotic situation.
Okay, so let's move on to the politics in Israel as you started talking about it. Do you see any chance of a compromise these days between the two sides of the political map? And especially, of course, when it comes to the judicial reform, which the Likud continue promoting this past week?
I don't see any collaboration or cooperation in the near future. I don't want to sound glue, but I don't see any collaboration. People should know that Israel is in the midst of a quiet civil war. This is a very difficult time for Israelis. There is a new government in Israel since January that literally is trying to change not only judicial issues on the issue of the separation of powers between the judiciary, the legislator, and the executive, but also trying to change the ethos of the state, the ethos of Zionism, the ethos of the liberal democracy, injecting into it much of religiosity, a new vision of what Israel should look like. And this is perceived by a large segment of Israelis as an assault on their way of life, on the way of life of a liberal democracy. And as a result of that, we are here into a clash that perhaps emerged maybe earlier than people have thought because of the demographic shifts in Israel and ideological demographic shifts with religious people, ultra-Orthodox and extreme right-wing messianic groups taking a center stage with tremendous powers, empowered by Netanyahu and the Likud as coalition partners. And as a result of that, the Israelis have been witnessing a deterioration in the sense of kinship ties, of brotherhood. The hatred that you see in Israeli society is completely new in the sense of its intensity, and the judicial reform, so to speak, the idea of curtailing the court from its activism, whatever the term is only one symptom of a much wider and deeper crisis that the Israeli society is now facing.
This sounds very pessimistic, I would say. Yet the head of your party, the party that you represented, Israel Beiteinu, Victor Lieberman, which refused in the past to join a coalition headed by Netanyahu, lately seemed to maybe hinted several times that he might change his mind if he joins a coalition with the ultra-Orthodox. If we take into consideration all kinds of aspects changing in Netanyahu's trial as well, do you think this is a possible scenario, maybe together with Benny Gantz and instead of the Haredim and the religious Zionism party?
I don't speak for Mr. Lieberman. I do not belong right now to the political system. I left the Knesset, so I speak only for myself, and I do not represent the party in any fashion. I don't think that even Mr. Lieberman in his articulation wanted to show that he wants to collaborate with Netanyahu. He just made the articulation that if Netanyahu would have done A, B, C, and D, and getting rid of all his coalition partners, which is almost like saying, I'm getting rid of my family, we would have joined him. This is not at all in the cards, and I don't want to deal with Mr. Lieberman. I'm dealing with my vision and how I see it. There is no way that Netanyahu will give up on his partners. They have nowhere else to go. Netanyahu's major concern is to keep his coalition intact, and he has partners who have no other coalition partners available. And for them, he is the leader who should basically execute their policy, and they're very successful in doing so. So both he is successful in ensuring his power, and they are successful in ensuring that his power enables them to execute their policy. This is quite a coalition that is changing Israel and enabling Netanyahu to continue his power, and of course also enabling him to deal much more effectively with his own personal issues, trials, etc. So I don't see any way in fashion that a new coalition will emerge. And I will add another point here. I don't think that the opposition, be it Mr. Gantz or Mr. Lapid or Mr. Lieberman, whoever they really presents a serious right now alternative as a coalition, an alternative coalition. They have to unite. They have to show something else. And I think what will happen is that the state of Israel will deteriorate further. The economy will deteriorate further, and perhaps the economy will be the one that will force changes, because right now what we see is the decline in the ability of the state to generate capital from taxation, huge decline, let's say in real estate and VAT, huge decline in investment in the high-tech industry. So many people in the economy, all the economists, whoever you ask, including the Central Bank of Israel, are quite gloomy about the possibility of Israel to move without a new coalition in improving the economic conditions. This is a big challenge. In addition, of course, to the demand of the United States, this judicial reform will not be like that. to the rivalry that exists between Netanyahu and the Biden administration, albeit there is collaboration between the American state and Israeli military echelon. And all of these will have to play out how things evolve. We don't know how it will evolve. We are those who are seeking to replace the government, hoping that this deterioration will lead to further decline Netanyahu's popularity. Polls are showing that Gantz, who is in the opposition, is either leading the opposition and would have won now elections, but elections are not in the cards. We have a government which was elected for 4 years, even more, and the judicial reform can also create tremendous unrest. Keep in mind, former Prime Minister Barak and others have called for civil disobedience, have called for extended actions to curtail government's policies, and violence is not yet among the is not yet shown itself in society, but I think we are getting closer into more violent clashes in Israeli society.
Well, let's hope we don't get there. I really hope so. I wanted to speak about
this by analysis. Of course, I hope so. I hope we don't get there too. You ask me, but this is how I see it, because you see that there is also a clock. The clock is ticking, but the clock has many, we have many clocks, and that has to be explained also to our viewers. There is the clock of the parliamentary legislation. Parliamentary legislation are related to sessions of the House, of the Knesset. So the sessions of the House and the Knesset, or before they're going into their summer vacation, 4 months of vacation, are ending in the end of July. If the Knesset is not capable or the coalition is not capable of legislating the way they want to do and not generating more civil unrest, the unrest may be kind of like, I would say, quiet down into the summer, and things can emerge for negotiations. We had negotiations by the president of Israel, was the ceremonial president, in his house, but they broke down because they have not appointed members into a judicial committee to select the judges. And right now there is kind of like a deadlock. Many people, including the former attorney general of the country, Mr. Mandelblit, spoke yesterday, who said that we are into a crisis of a destruction of the state of Israel. That's how he said. And he's a right-winger, a liberal right-winger. There are lots of voices being heard. The media is saturated with all kinds of voices. And the possibilities are, people are testing the water. Are they going to test the water with more violence? Are they going to test the water with explosions in the West Bank, as we have seen? After the last terrorist attack, massive terrorist attacks that killed 4 Israelis, remember there was recrimination by settlers in the West Bank and the burning of villages and so on. So these things can erupt quite fast and also change matters. So there are structural issues that are the economy, the state system, the legislator, there's the terrorism, and of course there is kind of like the hovering in the air, the question of Iran, which is a huge question, the question of Hezbollah and Hamas, all of these questions. The system is saturated. The hatred is growing, undoubtedly. All our indications, scientific indications, showing that the idea of brotherhood is declining rapidly in Israel, and that's the most alarming issue. And this is something one should not underestimate. Now, whether this will explode and how it will explode, Israelis, especially those who are demonstrating, have shown tremendous restraint. They are not like in France, when you see like burning, or like in the United States, in Black Lives Matter burning the cities. This is not the type of the demonstrations in Israel. On the contrary, it's very kind of like the concentrated on demonstration which are nonviolent, but one should never underestimate the possibilities of explosion, because we also have in the government ministers who are almost, I would say, inciting for violence in the government, including a Minister of Internal Security Affairs, who is an insider by his own kind of like history as in Judea and Samaria. Minister Smotrich and others, they consider this type of liberal Zionism that has been governing Israel for so many years as antithetical to their thesis of how Israel should look like. In addition, there is a division of labor because of the ultra-Orthodox issue of serving in the army and so many other issues that have really can, in one way or another, inflate this rivalry and bickering and ruptures in society and perhaps flare with new violence. I cannot predict, but I would not preclude the possibilities that this will happen.
Okay, let's move on maybe to international politics, to Israeli relations with other countries. You spoke about the U.S., the relations with the U.S. What do you think about the personal relationships between the leaders of the two countries at the moment, between Netanyahu and Mr. Biden? Is there a rift, as many claim? And do the upcoming elections in the U.S. may provide an opportunity to change that?
Look, there is a rift, of course. Netanyahu, in the last decade or so, when he was prime minister, was in a constant clash with Democratic administrations, especially with the Obama administration, and embraced, of course, the Trump administration. Many people in America saw Netanyahu and Trump almost as Siamese twins. And the administration of Trump considered Netanyahu's alliance very, very important part of the puzzle with evangelicals, with voters, and so on. So the Biden administration and Netanyahu is not a love story. And we know Biden has not invited Netanyahu to the White House and made an articulation when he was asked, will you invite him? And he answered almost aggressively, no. This is unheard of in terms of the relation, because there is no approval of the American administration, of this Israeli administration. And this Israeli administration, which considered the Democrats in the House, especially the left wing of the Democrats, but also the Democrats, not their allies, but perhaps people they have to work with, but certainly not ideological allies, but considered the right wing of America, the conservatives, and the supporters of the conservative ideology as their allies, are awaiting that the Republicans will come back to power. This is the policy of Netanyahu, gaining time vis-a-vis the American administration. Let the Republicans come to power, and they do not hide it. If you speak the way I do with legislators and policymakers in the government, they tell you directly, we are waiting for the people of the Republicans to come back to power. They are our natural allies. And indeed, the Republican, if it's the governor of DeSantis, if it's Haley, if it's Trump, if it's Pompeo, for them, there is a natural kind of like a symbiosis with Netanyahu and the conservatives in Israel. In fact, the conservatives in Israel and the Likud and the policy of judicial reform is almost, I would say, an import of the American conservative wing. And you see that the think tanks, the money, and so on also comes from the United States. So this is also something one has to understand, that you have like United States vis-a-vis Israel is splitting, albeit the public is still more, Israel is more popular than Palestinians and so on, but that's not a competition. But in the media, if you look at the media, the American media, between the New York Times, which has always been kind of like on the center left, the Wall Street Journal, etc., you see this split is growing. It is growing and will grow. I would say it's not going to be static, because the very idea of Israel and America as the nexus between Israel and America is going to grow if there will be such a rupture both in America. As you see, in America, there is a rupture between the conservatives and the Democrats, and we see the rivalry, which is growing. The enmity in America is impacting also what is happening in Israel. And that is something which is kind of entangled with the Israeli situation.
And what about the relations with the Jewish community in the U.S.?
Look, the diaspora as I wrote about it extensively in my book, The Israeli Century, is very important, but has been weakened significantly. The Israeli government did not invest in the liberal diaspora. In fact, it has seen elements in the government, including in the ultra-Orthodox party, including the minister of the diaspora, considered the liberal wing of American Jews, I would say, as nemesis, almost as enemies. And they would have articulated, and they're trying to sometimes to cater to them because these are still part of the diaspora, but they do not love them, I can tell you. They consider them as too liberals. They consider them allies of the Israeli liberal Zionists, and they're trying sort of like to muddle through until they will function. In fact, when the American embassy was opened in Jerusalem, and this was during the Trump administration, the liberal jury was not invited. The evangelicals were, and when the main organ of the right wing, Makor Rishon, the Israeli paper, wrote about it, he wrote about the liberal Jews as a diaspora that is sinking. And one of the chief rabbis at the time said, who died, who said to them, "Our brothers and sisters are sinking, and we are not going to save them." Because for them, liberal Jewry is not a future ally, nor do they support the idea of the land of Israel or the religious notion. You have to understand that Israel is split along religious line between those who are more religious and those who are less religious. The more religious you are, the more you are in the Israeli right. And this split is becoming the cultural warfare that Israel is facing and will face into the future. And one should not underestimate the flames that this can erupt in the Israel. We have all the indication, all the study to show, and this is alarming to many Israelis on all sides. The religious people, the ultra-Orthodox, are also fearing what will happen because they know that once this flares up, everybody will be injured. And the sense of what Netanyahu constantly said, we should remember we're all brothers. Indeed, this is a very important call, we should remember. But the Israelis' feeling of brotherhood has declined. All our studies show it's declining rapidly.
Okay, we had more questions. We wanted to talk about Iran, about the Abraham Accords, but I'm afraid the time is up, so we'll have to try that some other time. Professor Yossi Shain, thank you very much for joining us here today.
All the best to you.
We hope you enjoyed that briefing by the Jerusalem Press Club. If you did, like the video and hit the subscribe button to stay up to date with all of our future content.